Hi, everybody. Thanks, Doug, for the great kickoff. Hi, guys. So, Doug, you kicked us off this morning by basically challenging the funnel, saying that this is typically an add-on channel, but we're obviously here to prove that wrong. But how do you do it in a way that drives performance? And that's exactly what we're going to chat about. Guys, will you introduce yourself?
Yep, I'll start. I'm Ariel Villard. I'm a director of programmatic and media at Monks, formerly Media Monks. I've been at Monks for 4.5 years now. I like to say that my team does basically everything that falls out of social and search. So programmatic, brand, out of home, podcasts, audio, you think it, my team handles. And most recently, a lot of traditional out of home as well as digital out of home.
All right, I'm Will. My title's up on the screen, so everyone knows who I am, but I am an integrated planning director at PPK. We're based out of Tampa, Florida. I work in everything from search to social, programmatic, traditional, in-store, digital out of home, you name it. I've worked in it, and that's pretty much it. I've been at PPK for almost 10 years. Started as a coordinator, so I've worked my way up the ranks, and I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So let's just start right off the bat getting into it. When you hear digital out of home as a full funnel channel, what does that mean to you in practice?
I think it's all about the strategy behind it, right? And the screens or the exact tactics that you're thinking of. You know, typically people think of bulletins, right? Like digital out of home. Bulletins, posters, or whatever, but for me and for my team and the clients that I've worked on, that can extend into retail, in-store, mall, street kiosks. Really, you have to like diversify your thinking with how you want to target your consumer and the most relevant environments. So for me, you know, you can use bulletins for awareness, you can use in-store for conversion, you can also use bulletins for intent, you know, for really being able to showcase your products in a large screen, you know. So I think it's really about how the creative and media strategy come together for being able to hit the consumer at each phase of the journey.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think tying off of that and the creative and media strategy, I think Valentina also teed it up nicely, is out of home is typically first thought of as an awareness channel. When I first started in the space, we used to buy big static billboards on the LA Sunset Strip for brand awareness without real measurable outcomes. I think from 7 years ago to now, we've really evolved in the digital out of home space and being able to buy out of home programmatically, layering on contextual targeting, buying dynamic ads, having dynamic creatives. The space has evolved a lot and it's allowed us to tie storytelling to engagement to conversion. I work on a lot of B2B clients, so heavily brand performance focused. We want to make an awareness impact, but we also want to make it performance-based and measurable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ariel, sticking with you for a second, from a programmatic and creative lens, how are brands best activating digital out of home to make it measurable?
Yeah, so buying programmatic has allowed us to be able to dynamically optimize campaigns, change creatives as needed based off of the audience we're targeting, the geo we're in, the message we're trying to deliver. The programmatic makes it easy to buy. The message makes it relevant and successful. The message is really about like the moment that you're in and making sure that you're showing up with the right creative. Whether it be a QR code that is allowing for engagement, or you're targeting a conference center, which we do a lot in the B2B space, and tying back with the CTA. So visit us at booth 210, or ask our reps about XYZ, like being able to hone in on the message and captivate your audience to allow for that flow.
At a conference center, when you have a bunch of different folks going to the booth, how do you really measure that, and how do you know if it's effective?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it falls back on word of mouth. We also work with different measurement partners to be able to measure the effectiveness of the campaigns. I think we are probably going to touch on this in a couple like throughout this conversation, but I think measurement is definitely a hot topic for digital out of home. So measuring the impact of the campaigns, especially like in a conference center, is definitely subjective to like the clients or the partners, vendors that we're working with. In terms of the driving traffic to a booth, it's usually generally just mostly word of mouth and signups, like lead gen. We turn a lot of our digital out of home into like visit us at this booth, fill out this form, getting leads, but also referencing point of exposure.
Makes good sense. Will, how do you integrate digital out of home into a broader media mix so that it's not a silo, but it is truly a performance driving?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we had our kickoff call, we were talking about this. We talk a lot about matching luggage set, right? So making sure you really have some common branding and having that replicated across the media plan and all your touch points so that you're really driving the maximum recall and synergy across all the channel touch points is pretty much my simple answer for that.
Talk to us a little bit about your specific clients that you're working on. I'm very interested for this audience to hear a little bit more about particularly your lottery clients.
Yeah, so the Florida Lottery, I spoke in Scottsdale 2024 basically about us moving over from old static bulletins that we use for Powerball and Mega Millions that had these giant rotary digits on them that would flip for the jackpot, and basically our client was frustrated with the fact that after $1 billion, after the jackpot got to $1 billion, it only said $9.99. So the consumer excitement kind of petered off a little bit. Even though there's diminishing returns, you still want to make sure that you're generating that awareness and saturating the marketplace with, you know, that high jackpot amount or whatever. For the lottery, we moved over to 100% digital out of home for our jackpot. The creative looks identical to the statics. We were able to save like $1 million in production, basically, that we were obviously able to funnel back into the media plan, which helps our ROI, generate sales and such like that. And also the nimbleness too with the messaging. You know, if the jackpot's low, we can heavy up on our product, we can heavy up on our education messaging. So we just have that flexibility and just being able to also have a stronger coverage too, because you know that's typically most of the units that are getting built these days are going to be digitals versus statics. So.
Now, the lottery is a traditionally heavy digital out-of-home buyer, right? But for those other companies where it seems like it's an add-on to the mix, how do you really justify out-of-home as a channel within the mix to leadership teams who might not believe in that?
That's a great question. I feel like regardless of the brand or, you know, client that you're working for, there's always a need for awareness, and out of home is pretty much outside of, you know, after magazines is the OG kind of for mass awareness, you know, and so usually I haven't had a lot of difficulties with selling in digital out of home for my clients because of that.
I think in the B2B space, it's all about tying it into your omni-channel strategy. So we tend to sell out of home as more of like, yes, we run a lot of conferences and specific event targeting, but it's also a selling point as part of a bigger evergreen strategy when you're selling it as a step in your channel. So you're exposed to a CTV ad, you later get exposed to a digital out-of-home ad, we're collecting your mobile ID and adding you to our retargeting pool, you're getting retargeted with a digital ad, whether it be a native ad, a display ad, another CTV ad, and that's really driving in on, one, the frequency of your ad exposure, making sure you're being hit with different creative messaging with a similar look and feel throughout your journey, and then driving you to engagement and conversion. So really selling it as a part of your omni-channel strategy and not just this big flashy moment where out-of-home typically falls into, and then being able to hone in on the measurement or the performance side of it through that retargeting pool.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that piece. How are marketers tying digital out-of-home exposure to business outcomes like foot traffic or sales lift or what have you? And are there any particular tools or methodologies that are proving most effective here?
I think I can start. I talked about this again when I was in Scottsdale. It's luckily we're blessed with the lottery that we can do an annual mixed marketing modeling study. So we are able to model out their actual ROI, which is pretty much, the most effective and accurate way for, being able to assess performance. Looking at sales, looking at the impressions, looking at the efficiencies, placements, all the tactics that are running within the media plan, and making those really deep optimizations year over year to try to drive those goals for your client.
Sure.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, we use, of course, like piggybacking off the brand lift studies, but it's also looking at branded search lifts. So if you're running a geo campaign in New York, in Times Square, not only are you looking at, sure, the exposure IDs, but did you see a lift in branded search terms for your brand in New York City? Did you run a campaign, a digital out-of-home campaign, maybe in LA, or in a smaller market somewhere, and see a random surge in branded search? So figuring out really with your clients, like, what is the outcome of this campaign? How do you want to define success? And is it just like you're trying to build awareness, or you're trying to drive increased traffic to your site, increase branded search, and then really like honing in on how you're going to measure those outcomes.
So the setup is pretty important there.
Yeah.
So what are the pitfalls that we should be avoiding, or the pitfalls and the limitations of measurement?
I think fragmentation is a big one. I think I've worked with multiple vendors in this room, and I think there's still, and to no fault of anyone, there's a lack of cohesive measurement strategy across vendors. So fragmentation right now, I think, is still a pretty big one. Delay in reporting. So a lot of the data comes in post-campaign, and we're not necessarily always able to optimize in real time or change our strategy or tactics based off of like real-time measurement. It's more likely, okay, this campaign ran for 6 months. We saw these results post-campaign. Now we have to work towards our next campaign. We can't backtrack and like make good on what didn't work, or maybe what did work. And then also, I'd say scalability and privacy. More and more, there are privacy settings on our phones that are getting more and more granular. As individuals, that's great for us. As a marketer, it makes our job harder. It's harder to hone in on deterministic like audiences and targeting when we're having such a hard time reaching the right audience in the right place because of privacy settings getting more,
Getting tricky.
Yeah, getting trickier.
All right, so let's talk about pretty stuff. Creative. So creative is such a vast opportunity for different formats to come to life, be that in storytelling and messaging, or just the pure formats themselves. So what role does creative play, and how do you ensure that it drives not only awareness but also performance?
I think just going back to the matching luggage thing, right? So making sure that there's consistency with the creative strategy. You don't want to. Sometimes I feel like out of home can be a little overly simplified. You know what I mean? Or overly complex. You really need to make sure that it's meshing and cohesive with the rest of the media plan. As the consumer going to be able to see the out-of-home ad and tie it back to the TV spot that they saw the night before. For out-of-home, if you're looking at bulletins, making sure you're taking driving conditions, weather conditions into consideration, visibility at nighttime, for example. Those are all like tactics, as part of the creative strategy that you really want to take into consideration to make sure the creative is shining the way it should.
Is this a Willism? Is this matching luggage?
Yeah, I think I'm going to coin it actually after this wraps up. Yeah.
Love it.
I love it.
Sorry, just jumping in also, I think it's relevance of the moment that you're in. I had a client earlier this year that ran a geo campaign around the Zendesk conference in Vegas. They are a direct competitor to Zendesk. And all of their messaging was really like, we do this similar to them, but here's why we do it better. And it was animated, it was a lot of colors, great ads, and very captivating, and it performed really, really well because the creative was aligned with the moment that they were presenting it in, and it flowed throughout their channels. It was the same creative strategy across CTV and display, so we were really able to hone in on that audience.
Spicy, I love it. Okay, I think we have time for one more question before we head to audience questions. So what advice would you give marketers getting started in a digital out-of-home career?
I would say, well, I can't speak to your careers, but I can speak from an agency perspective. If a brand is coming to you to run out-of-home for the first time, really hone in on the why and the how. What are the objectives of this campaign? Very often with B2B clients, we have CEOs who want to run big, flashy out of home with their incremental budget just to reach board members or stakeholders. There's no real objective, and then they'll come back in a month and ask, what was the outcome? We didn't discuss an outcome. So really honing in on like, what is the objective of your campaign? How are you gonna measure the success of this campaign? And then tapping into the programmatic aspect of digital out of home. There's so many ways now to buy digital out of home. You don't have to spend $1 million to have an effective campaign. You just have to have great creative and a great vendor to work with and really testing it out. And you'll, I think, most often find out that it could be part of your bigger, more evergreen strategy, and it doesn't have to be just a one-off campaign.
I think for me, just knowing all of the vendors that exist there and all their capabilities is really key for getting, understanding the industry and getting your foot in the door for digital out of home. So basically kind of what you're saying as well.
Yeah, makes good sense. Okay, questions from the audience? I don't want to hog all the questions up here. Over here. Tell us who you are, please.
Thanks so much. Pete Anderson, Vistar Media. Thanks, you guys. Curious, Ariel, you mentioned fragmentation being a challenge, and interested, Will, in your perspective on this as well. But can you talk a little bit about how that is a bottleneck to the planning process, and maybe some thoughts on how that could be resolved by the industry?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think coming from Vistar, it's actually fitting because I think when we work with digital out of home, we work with a lot of different partners. They don't necessarily speak to each other. We're getting data from one partner and then different data from a different partner. And maybe we're getting the similar point is that we're all getting mobile IDs that we can add to our retargeting pool, but we're not necessarily able to compare modeled data versus like actual data from a different partner. And I think maybe if all brands or vendors worked cohesively together, and maybe we bought in a single DSP like Vistar, the data is able to work together to form similar outcomes versus having to piece different points of data together from different vendors.
I think for me, it's more of the measurement side, so there's like GeoPath, and they're pretty much like the gold standard, like a Nielsen for when you're talking about like bulletins and stuff. But when you get into the in-store retail space, there's a lot of varied fragmented measurement. Some people are using, they're building cameras into the screens, right? So they're actually able to look at the eyes on impressions versus, traffic patterns or building device graphs off of the mobile IDs, from Programmatic. And so there's just a lot of, I think there needs to be some type of cohesive measurement so that you're able to give, those campaign deliveries, right, and the reporting to the client, and it looks at the full picture of the plan.
Cool. One more question? All right, right in the middle.
Hey, Joel Martin, Xperia House. Will, quick question. You guys have some amazing creative work at PPK for the Florida Lottery. How do you pick the different formats for those TV commercials that you're making? Like, are you making those in-house? Like, how are you making those videos that I see out there?
Yeah, so we actually have a separate production arm called Contender Studios, and they do all of the TV commercials. So everything is in-house. We are full service at PPK. Great question.
All right, Will, Ariel, Kate, thank you for the insights on performance.